And now I want to announce our guest, Saiganesh from Palo Alto. He had joined us for a kirtan a few weeks ago. He's an amazing classically trained singer, and he's also a light bearer minister, and I believe he's one of the business managers of Palo Alto. He's one of their up and coming young shining stars, and so we're very grateful to have him with us today to share. He's going to be doing a presentation here in a moment, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. This is the time you can turn on your cameras, wave, say hi. We'll keep the mics muted until the questions and answers, but it's always nice to see everybody's faces. So without any further ado, welcome, Saiganesh. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure, Maitri. Thank you everyone for joining. It's an absolute joy to be seeing everybody on Zoom. All of us have been on Zoom enough these days, but still, just wonderful to see new and old friends and connect this way. And this is such a beautiful weekend. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving weekend. I was writing to Maitri just a day or two ago. You know, Thanksgiving always reminded me of Christmas because right when we finish Thanksgiving banquet, I'm sure that's even more true for all of you who live in the South, because these things are a bigger family affair where you come from, even in California, where I'm speaking to you from right now. As soon as we finish Thanksgiving, that's the weekend. We generally buy the largest Christmas tree that we can find for our temple in Palo Alto. Generally, it's about 12, 13, 14 feet, however big we can find, because our temple itself is huge. And so we try to make it a bold statement piece there. And we also try to get a large Christmas tree for the community, for Shela Bhavan, which is the house where Asha lives, where we generally have a lot of parties and get-togethers. This year is going to be slightly different, as we all already know. So somehow this weekend, in my mind, has always been a kickstart for Christmas and of the holiday spirit, because it somehow launches us into this beautiful period of the year, this sacred time. So I thought today morning, rather than do the usual reading that we do and focus on the rays, I felt inspired to share a little bit about the season that we are entering and the uniqueness of this particular year, all the great opportunities that we have in these coming weeks and days for tuning into the spirit of Christmas, as Yogananda ji taught us to do. As these teachings of Kriya Yoga, the teachings of self-realization, they present to us a rather unique perspective on what Christmas is and how we can go deep and use these holidays to find that spirit of Christ within. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And before I do, I had an idea today morning in meditation, which I hope you will also enjoy. Maitri, I wanted to play a song from YouTube, if I can share my screen. I'm sure all of you have heard the song before, but the song is the perfect summary of what I was planning to share today. So it seemed like it would be a great start for. Let me know when you can see my screen. I think you can all see my screen now.
We can see it.
Okay. The song is Christ Child's Asleep by Swami Kriyananda. It's one of my favorite songs of Swami. And it certainly is one that I listen to a lot during this time of the year. Okay. Can you hear the sound?
No, we're not hearing the sound.
Okay, give me a second.
Yeah, when you do the share, you have to.
Yeah, I'm going to share computer sound. Okay, now I think you will.
Do we need to be muted for this?
The Christ child's asleep, the silence is so deep that round about with hope in their eyes. The animals await, their breathing they abate, they know their time
silence is so deep that round about with hope in their eyes, the animals await, their breathing they abate, they know their time has come to arise. For Jesus came on earth to offer second birth to all who would the blessing receive. The inner peace he brings can lift us on soul wings to soar in might and heaven perceive. Our pleasures and pains, our losses, our gains have kept us long bound. The ropes of yearning hemmed us round. We dreamed of imposing on desert sand, flower gardens of beauty, verdant vales of delight. Imagination misted our sight. The freedom we would know, Christ offered long ago, and even from his slumber flows peace. All creatures here on earth, alive to their own worth, can welcome love and win their release. The Christ child's asleep, the silence is so deep that round about with hope in their eyes, the animals await, their breathing they abate, they know their time has come to arise.
Thank you, Swamiji. It's hard to say anything after that song because that song really says everything so beautifully. You know, I did not grow up with Christmas. Christmas was introduced to me only about 10 years ago when, are you hearing me well? Is that good? No. Christmas was introduced to me just about 10 years ago when I discovered Ananda and this path of self-realization. Christmas is not that big a deal in India, especially if you just grow up in a traditional Hindu household. It's a holiday where you get a day off from work or school, but it's not necessarily as big of an event or celebration as it is in this country. And when I came to Ananda, I was introduced to this whole new world of honoring this time of the year, which all cultures do, interestingly. Even when I grew up in South India, there were a lot of traditions. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says in one of the later chapters, he talks about the expression of the divine in various forms and various aspects. And he talks about so many different ways he himself expresses in creation. And in the section which goes on for many, many verses, he says, of the months of the year, I'm this month called Magh in Sanskrit. And this month is the period between December 15th to January 15th, this time of the year. And Krishna says, of all the months in the year, I'm this particular period. And he goes on to say a lot of things, of all the objects on the day sky, I'm the sun. Of all the objects that you see in the night sky, I'm the moon. So the divine is that glorious expression of perfection in all respects. And this time of the year that we are starting to enter right now, not just that one day of celebrating Christmas, but just this whole season itself, is representing for us a unique opportunity to go deep and to find something that may not be accessible to us the rest of the year. In fact, somebody told me many years ago, I hope I'm getting this right, in some Scandinavian language, they talk about this time of the year of this, the part of December around Christmas time. They call these in English. They translate it as the thin times. And this person was telling me there's no way to translate this in English, because what that actually means is that the veil between the material and the astral plane is very thin. That somehow this miasma of delusion that we are constantly caught in, for just a brief few weeks, it just becomes thinner, and things that we don't normally have access to become accessible to us. And in the most beautiful way, in the most unusual of ways rather, we start tuning into the divine as a child during Christmas. And that is the energy of this whole festival. um, some years ago, I was reading a biography of Ananda Ma, who I'm sure all of you know about from the autobiography of a yogi. And this was a very small book. I had not read this before. And one of the first stories that this author shares in that book is his conversation with Ma. And if you remember from the autobiography of a yogi, even if you notice the exchanges between Master and Ananda Ma, he always calls Master father. And she generally referred not just to Master, that was not just unique in the way she called him. She called all of her male devotees Babaji or father. And this was interesting because this devotee went and asked Ma, we all call you mother, and you call me father. That sounds so strange. And then the Ma had such a sweet, poignant look in her face. And then she said, I want you to think of me as your child. And the author reminisces and remembers those lines of Ma. And I was also meditating on it. And, it is so simple if you think about it, for us to realize that we can easily forget our mother. You can go without calling your mother for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You can even forget what she does in her life. But if you had a 1 or 2 year old child, how long can you go without thinking of, remembering, constantly paying attention to every detail of that child? Somebody was sharing with me how deeply painful it is for a mother when she leaves her child in daycare for the very first time. I don't have children of my own, but I'm sure I can relate to that emotion. How painful it is. And apparently daycares have the system where you can just leave your child on the first day. You leave the child only for an hour. The second day you can leave for 2 hours. Those of you who have had children perhaps know what I'm talking about. But it's so touching. It's so deep, and that connection with that child is so intensely personal. And that's what we are developing. It is almost ironical because we are talking about developing this personal connection with this small Christ child, but we are actually talking about Christ consciousness. We are not just talking about a human child that incarnated. There are all these historical theories about the Gregorian calendar, and before Christ and after Christ, whether it was December 25th, whether it was, I don't know anything about all of this, but I know that different Christian faiths, sometimes all around the world, they celebrate Christmas different times of the year. The Orthodox faith in a lot of Eastern Europe, they celebrate Christmas much later in January, like the second week of January or something like that. All that is to just say that it is not so much about the exact date or a birthday of a person. As Asha once said when she was talking in Christmas, Jesus was not born to Mr. and Mrs. Christ. He was Christ because he was the anointed. He was bringing to us he was the descent of Christ consciousness. And what we are celebrating is not necessarily so specifically a birthday. We are celebrating the descent of Christ consciousness itself. One of the leaders of Ananda in Italy, she shared a beautiful story once, where she shared how the first Christmas creche itself was created by Saint Francis. And as most of you know, Master Yogananda ji called Saint Francis his patron saint. He had a deep connection with Saint Francis. And in fact, until that time, which is many centuries after Christmas, when Saint Francis came along, until Saint Francis came along, there was no concept of stigmata in the Christian faith. That was a particular, that was a unique expression of how he tuned into Christ. And after that, many saints and great souls like Therese Newman and Padre Pio, they all experienced that same phenomenon as Saint Francis did. And Christmas itself, they say, is a creation. Not a creation may not be the exact right word, but it was conceptualized in the way that we celebrate by Saint Francis, because he, for the first time, wanted to create this creche. He wanted to visually depict the sweetness of this child and the way we tune into that child. And it is even said that he brought live cattle. In the Bible, you only hear about sheep, and but the way we celebrate Kresh and Christmas these days, we put a lot of animals there, which is quite appropriate, as I'll speak about in a second. And he brought a lot of live cattle to that scene, and he created this whole manger for Christ. And this is the most interesting part. Although he had his monks and other disciples play all the roles of the people that were there in that creche, for the baby itself, he did not bring a real baby. He brought light. He brought, perhaps I'm assuming a candlelight or some way, he covered that light and he placed that light in that manger. Because what we are in fact celebrating is that Christ consciousness within. Master, you can find so many Christmas messages that Yoganandaji wrote, especially in the later years of his life, because he was less and less available for social celebrations. And in all of those messages, he makes such a significant point about how Christmas is not merely a social celebration. Christmas, he talks about how you can truly celebrate Christmas when you can awaken that Christ within, in the centers of perception in your spine and your brain. These are the words of Master that I was reading in one of his Christmas messages recently. And it is such a beautiful time for us to discover that Christ consciousness within, but also invite it, coax it with that love that you can open your heart to a child. The way you would relate to an innocent child, that's how we are relating to the divine. Swami writes in one of his books, I think it's the book, I think it is Awaken to Superconsciousness, where he talks about superconsciousness cannot be summoned by will. It cannot be brought to us because we want it. It can only be coaxed with love. It can only be invited by opening our heart. And the only way we can draw closer is by opening our heart more and more. 2 or 3 years ago, I was watching a webinar by Jyotish and Devi, and Devi shared this beautiful interpretation of the Christmas and the birth of Christ itself, which was very meaningful to me and something that I've meditated on quite a bit. Some of you may know this. Master, when he was referring to the virgin birth of Christ, he was a little bit cheeky. He did not necessarily endorse or speak against that point of view. I think all that he was saying is, it is quite secondary. All the details of that story and whether Christ was born to Mary through conception or just through God divinely given to her, whatever that was, those details are rather secondary to the fact that he was Christ consciousness itself that incarnated as a pure sinless being. And Devi was talking about the virgin birth of Christ and how Mary is always held as virgin. And she said, there is another meaning to how we hold that. The reason why we say Mary was a virgin and Christ's birth was virgin, because the birth of Christ is causeless. The birth of Christ is not caused because of the usual factors that we often imagine human life to be entangled by. The descent of Christ consciousness just happens through grace and compassion. It does not happen because there is a reason for it. It is reasonless, in a sense that it is not willed by that same cause and effect phenomenon that defines most of our rational thinking. It is quite beyond and transcends all of that, because the divine, as we read in our Festival of Light, oftentimes in Ananda Sunday services, the masters, the Christ descends out of pure compassion. They have no reason to come. And that's why the Bible always talks about the birth of Christ as virgin. Whether or not Mary was virgin or what the exact details of the story are quite secondary, because those are human lenses through which we look at spiritual truths that our minds can barely understand. But in truth, it is a fact that the birth of Christ is causeless, because the descent of Christ consciousness is causeless. And as we enter this time of the year, um, it behooves us, it is important for us to tune into that spirit. And, a few years ago, I'll just share this last story before I finish. Somebody sent me a Christmas card. This was a friend from Ananda, but who I had not seen for many years. This person was on and off connected with different things here. And this person was not particularly artistic, or they did not buy the best gifts or anything. They sent me a very simple card. It was just a simple background with some red and green, and it just had the word joy written in this just tiny little card. And it was a very sweet gesture. And I looked at that card, and I had received a few other Christmas cards from some other friends here at Ananda, and they all had, they were a little more elaborate. You opened it, and then there was this whole crush scene that was unfolding, the kind of cards that, that really, really make you wonder it's a piece of art. And this particular card, this person sent to me was much simpler. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, that really is the spirit of Christmas, that word joy, as simple as it sounds. And I was thinking about how in our own lives, even when we look around, doesn't matter what anybody's spiritual beliefs are, whether they meditate, whether they don't meditate, what particular, system of Christianity they believe in, or whether they go to church, whether they don't, you can see that as we enter this time of the year, there is this imperceptible, subtle, invisible wave of joy that sort of envelops and creeps into our lives in this unseen way. And that is the spirit of Christmas. One more story is coming to me, which I think is also sweet to share. This is also a story that Devi shared in one of her talks. She was talking about a year in Assisi that she spent. This must have been in the late 90s, I think. This was a time when the community itself was going through many, many great challenges. And Swami Kriyananda just picked up the phone and told Jyotish and Devi, you got to move to Assisi, because this place, nobody else can keep it together except the two of you. And they just left their life behind, and they moved to Assisi for a whole year. And it was a difficult time when the community was going through a lot of challenges. It was very unclear whether it was going to live through those challenges. And Jyotish and Devi, as we know today, they pulled it all together, and it's all beautifully working. And Devi talked about how the Christmas was so difficult for her. She moved to Assisi about, in November or something, and it was just the time when it was getting cold and dry, and, the trees were barren, and she had this tiny little apartment in Assisi. She did not have all her friends that she usually celebrated Christmas with. She was so far away from anybody who she taught as family. And then in this apartment that she was in, just by the window, she said there was a small wooden thing of joy, just the word Joy, carved in wood, like ones that you can get in any holiday shop, that was placed on the window. And as she looked at it, it was in her kitchen window, and she was looking at it, and she realized, as soon as she saw that, something in her shifted. She realized that that spirit is accessible to us, that somehow she can see this differently. And as she was entering that period of Christmas, that sacred time of the year, she can, in fact, have access to all the things that she associates with Christmas. And that, in fact, is the story of all our lives right now in 2020, because the spirit is going to be subtler for us to access without all the usual paraphernalia that we are used to. But still, it is still that same spirit of Christmas that we are tuning into, even when, you have, I'm sure all of us have friends that might not consciously be on a spiritual path. And we notice that people are less petty. People are less small-minded. The hearts are more open. People smile more, even when you go to stores, or even when you walk around on the streets. And yesterday, as I was saying, I was running in the afternoon, late afternoon time, and I was thinking about our Christmas tree and how this weekend of Thanksgiving always made me so joyful for what was going to come. Not that Thanksgiving is not joyful, but Christmas is so special. And as I was running on the street, I saw 3 cars, I'm not kidding you, all of them had their Christmas trees tied on the top of the car. And so just this brought me a smile as I was running past them. And that is the spirit of the holidays as we are entering, as Yukteswarji says so beautifully in the Holy Signs. I'll end with that. The entire spiritual path is resolving and neutralizing all the meannesses of the heart. In that same book, he says we cannot put one foot in front of the other on the spiritual path without cultivating that natural love of the heart. And the way we cultivate, the way we invite and welcome the Christ child is to neutralize all that meanness. And even more, especially during this time of the year, we all have the gift of these teachings. We all have the gift of meditation to go deep within to find that spirit inside in our own deep spine and to reflect it around to all those near and dear to us, to share that love of Christ, to share the joy of the sacred season with everyone. So, with that, I will end. And, there's a whole month to come. And even after that, as we go into Master's birthday, I hope you all have a wonderful, joyful, blessed, sacred season this year. So, thank you all for inviting me and joining me this beautiful Sunday morning.
Thank you, Saiganesh. That was beautiful, and it was the perfect talk to help bring us into this season. So appreciated. It's just, oh gosh, such a gift.